Hello, 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 everybody. Welcome to the Recovery Capital Podcast. My name is Joanna Dolan, and I am one of your co-hosts today. I'm also a recovery coach. I am a recovery coach trainer, and we're going to talk to you today about building recovery capital. So recovery capital is the internal and the external resources that we have available to us or that we build that help us to obtain, maintain, and sustain recovery, because really that's what we all want. So Amy, my co-host, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Amy DePietro. I am a person in recovery from drugs and alcohol, and Joanna's partner in crime for these podcasts. And that's it, right?
I guess if that's all you want to say.
I'm not, the focus is not on me. The focus is on the one and only Byron.
Yes!
Which I love.
Byron, you introduce yourself, my man.
Hi, I'm Byron Fogan. I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic and compulsive gambler. I am a former attorney. I am a former, or I guess ex-felon, however you want to call it. And I am so grateful to be sober today, and I'm grateful to talk to you guys.
Yes.
We are grateful that you are with us. Thank you so much for saying yes to this. I've told you before, like, the reason I admire you, like it's a hard road to hoe when you are someone who's in recovery, and also when you are an ex-felon, and you've got this way about you that I think I could grow from. That's the cool thing about this, right? Is we get to talk to our heroes. So, like, whether you know it or not, you are definitely one of my heroes for the work that you're doing, and just who you are, right? Like, we've only met on Zoom, and you bring yourself through, and I appreciate that. And so, like, the reason that, the number one reason I asked you was for that. And the number two reason I asked you is because, a lot of people in recovery, especially a lot of people that are in active addiction, seeking recovery, or, sometimes people, end up becoming committing crimes while they're in recovery, right? And like, there's a lot of stigma attached to that, but it's also one of the very important things about building recovery capital. So that's why I asked you to come on, because I think you have a good perspective, and you see it.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate being here, and, ready to talk about anything.
Like how I said that, Amy?
I do love how he says that. And, I haven't known, like Byron and I aren't best friends, but, we've been around about the same amount of time. We have about the same amount of time, sobriety time. And, I've been around him enough to hear him share and talk a lot. And I think that when you listen to people share their stories and things like that, oftentimes what people pick up on is like the crazy parts of our drunkard drug law, right? Like, that's the part people are like, no way, like, I can't believe you did that, or I can't believe you survived that, or you were living that way. And for me, the part I hone in on, and the part that I hope I always hone in on, is not about the mess, but about their message now. And It never ceases to amaze me. It has yet to happen. The human condition's ability to recover, right? Like, no matter how far down the scale we've gone, we have the ability to heal and to move forward. And I think that Byron is a really good example of that. So that, to me, is like one of my favorite things for anybody, but it makes me especially excited to have him with us today, for sure. So,
yeah, right on.
Yeah, Byron, I love you.
I think you guys are going to have me in tears early.
Good stuff, man. Here on a Friday.
Early this year.
Kicking this weekend off right with some Fucking gratitude. That's what I'm talking about.
Fucking gratitude. I got it.
That's awesome.
I got
Nothing better than gratitude tears.
Oof.
Nope. I'm going to try to hold them back for a second. We'll get to them, I'm sure.
You don't want somebody pulling poor Byron in his car trying to get out of the city, talking, going to be in his car, coming out of DC. Somebody's going to come up and ask if he's, are you all right?
I don't live here, I promise. See, it's nice and clean. I don't live here.
That's awful. Well, I think that's also an important thing to say, because this is something that affects all of us too, right? Is the reason that you're in your car is because there was another incident at the Capitol, so they shut the Capitol down. And like, I know it's off topic, but it's really on topic. Like, those types of things affect us. And I mean, like, for Amy and I, like, we would probably just pull off to the side of the road and be like, yep, and not even think about it. But I'm guessing, like, as someone who's a returning citizen, that's a nicer way of saying, for those of you guys that are listening, that's a nicer way of saying, like, ex-felon or ex-con, like, just citizens returning home after they've paid for what they did, and I think that's a beautiful thing. And having said that, like, if you, God forbid that happens, but if someone were to knock on your window and ask you what are you doing there, like, you probably are a little bit more nervous than we would be.
I think that's a great point. I mean, I came home in 17, right? So I came home, actually, it's almost a year. It was a year last month. I came home in March of 17. And I have to be honest with you, like, for the first 3 years, and it's one of the reasons we talked about it. Like, I went to Buffalo for a couple of years, and then I came back to Maryland. One of the reasons I left this region is because every time I turned around, even being in recovery for the number of years that I was in recovery, and even having gone and done my time for the crime that I committed when I was in active use, I still was becoming law enforcement involved all the time, right? And so what I had to get used to was, all right, becoming law enforcement involved is not a problem if you're doing the next right thing, right? So I had to start changing my perspective. My perspective for the first 41 years of my life was avoid the police, avoid contact with the police. And I wasn't good at doing that when I was actively addicted, right? Who can be good at doing that when you're swerving all over the road, or when you decide that you like to, beat somebody up or get beat up yourself? Those were all things that are part of my story in addiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when I came home, I had to change my entire perspective and just allow law enforcement involvement to be almost like the difference between a cloudy day and a sunny day.
Wow.
Okay, a cloudy day is still a day. Still a day.
Mm-hmm.
It still can be all right. It doesn't mean it has to rain. It doesn't mean it has to do any of that. Hey, man, it's just a cloudy day. So days when I am law enforcement involved, it's just a cloudy day. And it's just part of it. And I'm doing the next right thing. And, would I prefer that not to happen? Sure. But it happens. It may happen now as I'm sitting in this parking lot. You're absolutely right. And if it does happen, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm sitting in a parking lot on a Zoom call talking about recovery capital. And I can verify that. Like, I can, it used to be hard. And I used to always worry, hey, man, I can't prove I'm not doing anything wrong. Well, that's because I was doing something wrong. Today, I can easily prove that I'm doing nothing wrong. And it gives me another opportunity to share my story of recovery. And so, you don't know whether the law enforcement officer knocks on your door, needs to start recovery, or whether he'll say, hey, give me your phone number. I know a guy who I keep on pulling over every day. I've given him 18 DUIs and he still doesn't get it. Give me your phone number. Maybe you can talk to him. Like, you just don't know when an opportunity will come to do God's work. And the way I look at it again nowadays is, like, every time I come into contact with someone, even if it happens to be law enforcement, it's another opportunity for me to do the work that God wants me to do.
Oh, that's beautiful. So as a coach, one of the things I teach, and Amy, I'm sure, has heard this. I don't know if you have or not, but Amy definitely has heard this, is like when we are creating emotional states, it comes down to three things, right? It's what we're doing with our body, what we focus on, and the story that we tell ourselves, right? So like if I'm always cringing, then I'm going to be like, trying to get away from things. And I hear you saying I'm leaning into it. Like this is just going to happen. This is normal for me. It's normal for anybody, but like there's, you're leaning into it and you're very clear about what I'm doing. Like I'm here having this conversation with you guys. I'm not doing anything sketchy. Like I'm not going to do anything sketchy. Like the story that you're telling yourself is that this is an opportunity to do God's work. So no matter what happens, it's all good. And like the perception and the focus that you've got is like, it's okay. It's just a day. I mean, it is a day. Like, I thank God for a day. A lot of people don't have one.
Oof,
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I gotta ask though, man, so you came home in 17. What's that like now? You got less involvement?
So I think that it's abating, right? I do think so. I mean, when I came home, I had a period of what's called supervised release, right? So some of that period of time, the reason I was becoming law enforcement involved is because the law enforcement official whose job it was to oversee me was doing just that, right? And so, and that was a 3-year process. So once I got through the first couple of years, like slowly but surely, that kind of abated, right? And today, it knock on wood, it happens less. It still happens, but it happens less. But again, it's really perspective. I don't worry about it anymore. I truly don't. I'm not going back to jail. I'm not going back to prison. I don't do anything to go back to prison.
Yeah.
And even when I was there. So it's not just how you behave outside, it's also how you behave there, right? God went with me into prison, and somehow, some way, I was able to maintain my sobriety in prison. And
which is huge.
I carried that with me through prison. And if I can do that, I can do that out here. I can do that with God's help out here. And so it's just, I just do my level best not to worry about it anymore. I really do. It's going to happen, and there's not a damn thing I can do about it by worrying about it.
Yeah, it's wild you talk about being sober in prison, because I didn't go to prison. I spent one night in lockup, and so that was my personal experience. But my sponsor, her situation, she went to jail, so prison for her crime, and she got sober prior to going in, and stayed sober in prison. Actually did step work, like old school, writing letters to her sponsor, and she told me that when she finally went, when it all came out, like when trial and all that stuff was done, when she went into prison, she had never felt more free. That was her feeling.
Yeah. And so my story is, my life was great until I entered recovery. And the way I say that is because for the first time when I entered recovery, there were men in recovery, particularly men, who made me focus on the fact that for years I had not behaved or act like an adult. I had to turn my attention, and I was required to turn my attention to the wreckage that I had caused for so many years. And these are things that I'd never paid attention to, including, it turns out, the financial crime I committed. And when I walked into recovery, I can recall the first time I was visited by the FBI, and I was visited by the FBI about 6 months before I came in. And I was an attorney at the time. And I truly believed I was getting out of it. Number one, I didn't believe I did anything wrong, which is the delusion of addiction, right? I didn't think I did anything wrong. I misused somebody else's money, and I thought I was fine. But even when the FBI...
It's so hilarious. Like, we call that stealing.
I'm not joking. I mean,
I know you're not joking. I know you're not joking. That's the best part of it. But listen, I thought I misused somebody else's prescription pad. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not,
that's so awesome.
Misused it. Yeah. And so I turned my attention to what I was doing, and I was like, oh fuck, I committed a felony. Like oh fuck. And I didn't even acknowledge that until I got sober. And so through the process, it was 2.5 years in recovery before I really just stopped fighting. And I had some help from some people in recovery. Like, why are you going to go broke fighting this crime you know you committed?
Yeah.
Admit it, make the amends. The amends is going to be hard, and then let it go. And so while I get what you're saying, and the freedom for me came in admitting what I did, that I no longer had to fight, that I no longer was writing checks to attorneys and still lying, basically, or still trying to shade the truth.
Yep.
And I was able to let it go. Let it go.
Oh, that's just it's fascinating the way that happens. Like, while my experience isn't the same one that you had, like, but the feeling was the same. Like, when I admitted that what I had done was illegal,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? That, like, I stopped trying to justify my ridiculous behavior, which was clearly a felony. Like, it's written in the law. Like, you know, there was no way to, like, explain my way out of it, you know? And so there is, like, an inherent sense of freedom when you just accept where you're at.
Right.
There's nothing like it. And for me, in my experience, nothing has touched that.
Nope. And I agree with you. And it allows the process of the cleanup to be easier when you know you made the mess, right? And that's why we focus so much on like owning your own stuff. It is easier to clean up your stuff when you know it's yours.
Yeah.
And so just go ahead. I'm sorry.
What did you do to get to the place of owning your own stuff?
So part of it was that I had to start losing things that were ill-gotten, right? So again, this is why I say, like, when I came into recovery, like, you heard so many stories about people coming into recovery and their lives getting great right away, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that's not my experience. And finally, I ran into some guys who were like, yeah, I came into recovery and my life got crappy. I became better, but my life got crappy. And the reason why is because I had surrounded myself with things, right? I had surrounded myself literally with things that were spoils of ill-gotten gains.
Yeah.
And so as that facade started peeling me off, I mean, Andy, you knew me when I first came in. You know, I was showing up to AA meetings in, like, you know, suits and all this shit, like I'm a hotshot lawyer. Like,
Byron was a fly motherfucker.
And my shit.
I can see that.
Slowly but surely, my shit was just getting taken away, and I was losing it. And you know, my wife left me, and like, so it was a process of the way I'll describe it is like.
Sorry, the smart
like,
aleck on me is like, wait, did you get your wife through ill-gotten gains too? That's just a smart aleck. Sorry.
So what I would say is that I took a hostage.
Yeah, man.
but I took a hostage. Like, she was the perfect hostage. She was a very good woman. She made me look better by the way she lived and behaved. You know, she was a good God-fearing woman, very churchly. You know, our pictures with our beautiful son looked gorgeous. And like, I could put this out. It was another piece of the facade, right?
Mhm.
So just like the suits, just like the house, just like the picket fence, it was all a piece of the facade. It says, hey, I'm okay. I'm good. Meanwhile, I knew inside my soul for years that I was busted up and broken. There was a hole. I could pour everything into that hole and nothing would fill it.
Yep.
And so it wasn't that I got her through ill-gotten gain. It was just like, again, in recovery, I started losing things that I had obtained. And the reason why I obtained them was to hide the fact that I was broken inside. And so slowly but surely, God started a process of removing things from my life that were hindering me from having the life that he wanted me to have. And one of those things was this facade of great success, because that's all it was. It was a facade of great success. Inside, I was broken, and the way I behaved in society, I was a danger to society. And so God made me right-sized, and I'm no longer that today.
Yeah. It's crazy because as you say that, it, like, looking at you and hearing you, is the words come out of your mouth. Like, I know that you're grateful for that.
Yeah.
Super grateful.
Yeah.
Super grateful. Because now the friends that I have are real. Now the people that are in my life are real, and they're there. And I haven't done anything wrong to get them, to obtain them, to force them to be in my life and to kind of like, you know, weaken them so I feel strong. And that was how my life was before.
Yeah. I love that. I so get that, because, you know, people that don't really like maybe understand addiction, or maybe don't have like a personal attachment to it, they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. And it's like, no, you don't understand. Like, I'm sorry that I took the hostages, I love that word, along the way. I'm sorry for the pain that I caused, but I'm not sorry that shit happened. I'm grateful that it happens.
I'm grateful that I survived it.
Yeah.
I'm grateful that I survived it, and that the people around me survived me.
Yeah.
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 True.
Yeah.
That's a really great level of gratitude right there. Is like, yeah, I know I did some stuff, and I'm grateful that I survived. And like, I heard like almost a little bit of extra emphasis there, that like, you're grateful that they survived you. Like, that's really powerful. So,
That's it.
I heard you also say that you weakened others so that you felt strong.
Right.
So tell us more about, like, is that I suspect I know what it is, but for the people that are listening that may not be, you know, alcoholic, or you know, like, struggling with addiction, like, what do you mean by you weaken others so you would feel strong? Like, why did you need to feel strong?
I needed to feel strong because I did not have anything inside me at the time, and I've learned how to replace that, and I replaced that with God today. But I didn't have anything inside me that allowed me to feel good about me.
Mm-hmm.
And so my entire being was to find things that made me feel okay. And that included people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if I could codependently help someone, right, if I could make them completely dependent on me, then maybe I would feel good about myself.
Because you're a hero.
I'm a hero. Wow, it's excellent. I'm a hero. You know, and for people who aren't in addiction and haven't lived through that, it's a sick thing because I was unwell. How can you help someone when you're unwell yourself? When I was so unwell that there was no way anything I could do was going to help them through anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my solution was shitty for myself. How were my solutions that I was imposing on other people going to be any better? And they were bad. They were bad solutions. I had people doing things, excuse me, that put them in positions that were harmful to them for my benefit, all for my benefit. And so it took me years to realize that, in fact, I was weakening people to help me. Because it's like it says in the big book, like, I wanted to be the conductor of the show. I wanted to be everything in the show. And yet I was wondering why people were running into me and running against me, and yelling at me and screaming and feeling very disempowered and really harming me. And I was like, why? I'm a good guy. I'm this helping guy. Why are people robbing me? Why? Well, I mean, you took somebody in your house who was incompatible with being there, right? Why are people mad at me? Why are people angry at me? Why is the government mad at me? Yeah, I misused some money, but look at all the good I've done in the world. Like, I couldn't understand. I legitimately couldn't understand why I kept on ending up all alone. And we've talked about this being a disease of isolation. I heard that recently and I love it. And now I'm going to adopt it and steal it. And I'll give it its attribution later on. But it's a disease of isolation. I couldn't understand why every behavior that I undertook ended up with me all alone. And then my solution to being all alone was to go to the bottom of a bottle. That cycle played out over and over and over again. So yeah, I was weakening people, but what I was really doing was setting up a scenario where I'd be alone. I harmed them enough to where they gave up on me and they left. And then I was all very, 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 very alone. Oh, poor Byron. And Byron poured drinks down his gullet.
Oh, and then round and round the cycle goes.
And round the cycle goes. Because, hey, that person was too strong. I got to find a weaker person next.
Yeah. Oh,
and it just gets worse. Gets worse and worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I know we always talk about things like the didn't do's yet, right? Like, I didn't get to this level, this level. But I tell you what, I got to a whole lot of levels that I never thought I would get to. I did a whole lot of things that I would have never, ever expected to have done. And, I can't surround myself with people that wouldn't do the same thing, because then it puts the spotlight on my behavior, my choices. Because on some level, I think you're not supposed to do like X, Y, Z. For me, right? Like, I thought because I had like tangible things still, right? Like, I still had a truck, I still had a house, I still had these things, really because they hadn't taken it from me yet, right? I mean, it's not like I was making really excellent financial decisions when the first thing on my my list of things to pay for were drugs. Never a good when the first thing you spend your money on is drugs. You just keep going farther and farther. I had a friend of mine is a clinician therapist, and she says, if isolation is to addiction, then community is to recovery. And, it was one of those things where I've probably heard that before, but that day that she said it and I overheard it, I was like, whoa, that resonates with me 150%. Because even though I loved to barfly drink. Like I'm a weekend warrior drinker. I want to be at the bar. I'm the girl that wants everybody to know my name in the bar, right? 100%. I make a scene when I walk in, right? As I'm sure you can imagine. But I want to do my drugs in private because I don't want to share. So, you know, even in a bar full of people, I'm completely alone because nobody has any idea that literally while I'm quote unquote acting like the life of the party, I'm dying inside.
Yeah.
You know, I want to die. I want to find a way to not be here anymore.
I so relate with what you're saying.
It's
so relate. I didn't want to die so much as I just wanted to disappear. Because I was too much of a punk to die. Otherwise, I would have killed myself. I just wanted to disappear. I wanted somehow, some way to disappear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. I relate to what you're saying so much.
You know, the funny thing is like you can feel that way in recovery too, you know? And I mean, like, this is a big one for emotional sobriety, right? Is like, emotional sobriety is recovery capital, right? Like building that emotional network, learning that like, yeah, it's okay. Like this is a natural part of me. Like it's a natural part of the disease. It's never going to go away. Like sometimes it will feel a little less and sometimes it will feel a little more. It's what I do with it, right? So, my question is like, since you're clearly no longer doing those things, you may be doing it in some other ways. Like we all do it in other ways. Like, what do you do to help you to develop that connection? Because one of the things we were talking about before we even started was like introverts, right? Which you want to go ahead and share what you had said, because I agree with that 100%.
Well, what I shared is that introverts don't make friends, that an extrovert comes through and adopts us. And I'm very much an introvert. I'm not shy, so I can talk in these forums and I can speak in front of people. But my natural inclination, if I'm left to my own devices, I want to be small and alone and invisible. That's what I want to be. When I spend a lot of time with other people, I become exhausted, right? It exhausts me. I don't get filled by that experience. I have to give so much of myself to go through that experience that I then have to learn how to care for myself. And so we were talking about, we spent a lot of time talking about like what it's like to be an ex-felon. Well, here's the interesting thing. I mean, I want sometimes more than anything on earth to be invisible still. Doesn't mean I have to drink over it, but I want to be invisible. And one of the beautiful things, if you can describe this as beautiful, is that law enforcement won't allow me to, or at least they didn't used to. And so I had to learn how to get out of my house, how to leave my house. Because there was a period of time, even in recovery, where I was like, you know what, life is better when I don't leave my house. And so I had to train myself to leave my house. And then I also recognized and realized, and these are God moments to me as far as I'm concerned, but I recognize and realize that when I'm in a group of other people doing the right thing, I am much less likely to become law enforcement involved when I leave my house. So now I spend more time with guys who are doing the right thing. It's awesome. Cops don't pull me over when I'm in the car with a guy who's doing the right thing, going out doing 12-step work or going to an AA meeting. But they do if I'm roaming around at 2 o'clock in the morning because I'm lonely and I'm driving around in my car. That's not doing the right thing. Hey, it's made me become a more social creature. No one's ever going to accuse me, and you can ask my sponsor about this. There's not a damn person on earth who's going to accuse me of being a social butterfly. That is not what I am. But I do make a point of fellowshipping, in particular with men in recovery, as often as I can bring myself to do it without without harming myself, right? Without doing some of the same things we talked about, like where I'm helping beyond my capacity in order to weaken them to strengthen myself. I feel like I spend time with men in recovery, and it's mutually beneficial, and we both get something out of it. And when we're ready to go home, we go home. And that's all new for me. And that's all learning through recovery. And that's being forced to learn through even being in a
I think it's
something. Might not like the way he's teaching it, but that's one of them. He's teaching me I got to leave the house, and I got to be capable of interacting with the world when I leave the house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, right on.
How long do you think it took you to find like a good balance? You know, and then what's like the warning signs when you're maybe expending too much of yourself so that you know to back it down and to practice some of that self-care?
So I can explain this two ways. So I'm going to start with the first part, which are like, what are the warning signs? The warning signs are I'm not taking care of myself. When I first came into recovery, I mean, the God's honest truth is I had a housekeeper, right? I didn't make my own bed. And when I came into recovery, I'm starting to lose my money. I can't afford a housekeeper anymore. And somebody told me every morning you got to get up and make your own bed. Oh my God, I hate that shit. But I did it. The first warning sign that I see that I'm giving too much of myself to other people is when I have given up making my bed. Because, and this is the beauty of working in community with other men. I wouldn't have recognized that as a problem. I'm actually kind of a messy Marvin, and it's not that big a deal. But the fact is that that's something that's important, and I know that I'm running out of resources if I'm not making my own bed.
Yeah.
I'm making a decision to give myself to other things rather than take care of my most basic needs, which is making my bed. So I've got this wonderful trigger that tells me, hey, things are going haywire. Stop, talk to somebody, stop, pray. What's happening here that this has stopped being important? You have stopped being important to you. Why?
Yeah.
I think that's really important, man.
Yeah.
Also a good reminder for me. I make my bed every day, but I'm thinking about the dishes.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a little thing that it's so easily recognizable. If it was a big thing, I mean, my apartment is a freaking mess. I don't mind it that way. But I always have this thing that I can look at. Hey, man, did you make your bed today? If you didn't, you probably didn't take your chance to pray, which means other things are taken, because I prayed next to my made bed. If I didn't make my bed, I didn't stop to pray.
Yep.
Interesting.
So there's all kinds of little things that I've done with myself. But the real question that you asked was, how long did that process take? It took a long time. It took a shit ton of time.
Yeah.
It wasn't automatic because this is not something that I ever practiced. It was not something I ever practiced. It wasn't even something I saw growing up. My parents didn't think I was an alcoholic, even after I came into recovery and told them, because they lived their life. It gave them something to take care of my alcoholic ass.
Yeah.
And so I was raised to think that for love, you give the last measure of yourself. But really, that was what they needed to. It was their issue. It wasn't my issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I've learned through a lot of practice, through watching men in recovery. And again, I'm focusing on men because a lot of the hostages that I took were women. And I didn't really know how to be an adult man. So the men in recovery have taught me how to be an adult man. And I spend much more of my time surrounded by men in recovery, continuing to learn from their example, even sometimes their bad example.
Yeah, true. Absolutely. I mean, as my sponsors, my grant sponsor always says, we're not exactly a hotbed of mental health. So, you know what I mean? Like there's folks out there that we can use as like a great example of what we aspire to. And then there's some folks out there that we're like, whoa, you know. And
No, I'm not going to do that.
yeah, and I don't say that to be like judgy, you know what I mean? Because like everybody's level of like comfortability and standards are different. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but you know, I think we've definitely all had those experiences, like what to do's and what not to do's that work for us as individuals. I love that the thing that I love that you're talking about is you have found a way to make recovery fit you, right? And that's one of the cool parts about some of the things about Recovery Capital, really, that I learned from Joanna is that it's not a one size fits all, and there's so many different pathways to achieve. I always tell her like I want to make like a rap song out of the obtain, sustain, and maintain recovery. You know what I mean? Because that's my favorite part. You know, when she goes in her little gig there.
You know, someone's going to pick that up and be like, I'm going to create that song for Amy.
Yeah, hell yeah, I'm in. I'm on. But you know, I just think it takes the pressure off, right? Like I got sober just like you did, and I would say that it works for me. It worked for me then, works for me now. But I know a lot of people that it didn't work for whatever, you know, whatever reasons, and I was woefully unaware of all the different ways that someone can get to that place of sustained recovery. And, you know, I love that you found something that fits you, you know, and that you're thriving on.
Right. And I appreciate that. And I think that no matter what road you take, like, the acceptance of myself that I have found in recovery, and I mean, I think that's where it starts no matter what. The acceptance of myself. For 41 years, I thought I desperately had to change who I was. And it was the hole that was bored into me. I had to change who I was. And coming into recovery, the thing that I learned is that you don't need to change who you are. You might have to change what you do. You don't have to change who you are. And that acceptance of myself, you don't have to change who you are. You just have to change what you do. Whew. That was a big deal. Because changing who I was is what I did. And it never worked. Because at the end of the day, I was who I was. I'm Byron Fogan. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a compulsive gambler. I'm a whole list of isms, right? I'm a whole list of weird shit. And so learning that I don't have to change that, I have to change my response to that. And when I change my response to that, like as a person who loves that, I love that about me. I love that there's some crap that I did that I love, right? I love that I got some of these crazy stories. But I have to change my behavior because now I have knowledge of what that means and I can't behave that way. And so that becomes a strength rather than a weakness, right? Particularly compulsive gambler. That's a funny one for me. I didn't mind being a compulsive gambler. It ruined my life. But I didn't mind it. But knowing that now makes so much sense. It makes my whole life make sense. And now I don't have to do it anymore. I am still a compulsive gambler, but I got a God of my understanding who stands between me and my next bet. And more importantly, I can use that story to help somebody else. Like, it's just that acceptance. And I don't care what kind of way you come into recovery, but I think, in my limited experience, it all starts kind of with acceptance, right? You can't come into recovery if you haven't accepted that you have a problem. Everything in recovery starts with accepting that you got a problem. And that means accepting who you are.
Right on. You know, as you're sitting there saying that, I'm sitting here thinking, that I'm sitting here thinking like it's not even it's about accepting who you are, and it's also being okay with that. Like I hear an incredible amount of like it is, and I'm okay with that.
Yep. But I can be okay with that because I know that who that person is doesn't mean that I have to behave that way. Because again, I've got a God of my understanding who wants me to be happy. So there are some things about me that if I do, I'm not going to be happy. I'm not going to be happy. So yes, I am a compulsive gambler, but if I go out and place a bet today, guess what? I'm not going to be happy.
Yeah.
So God stands in the way of that. But also prompts me to use that part of myself to do really good things too. Right? Because sometimes it's the same, it's opposite sides of the same point, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You're a risk taker, so you're out here talking about recovery and talking about being a felon and talking about having a great life. There's a risk-taking element to doing that. I don't know how this will affect my career. I certainly have struggled finding jobs for a time. But at the end of the day, like, that's still risk-taking ability or risk-taking stuff that God's using, just in a positive way. It's
so
just
funny.
an opposite side of the coin.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's so funny that you say that. So one of the things that I teach as a coach is 6 human needs, right? So it's human needs psychology. It's based on Tony Robbins' work. And it takes Maslow's work, and it takes Erik Erikson's work and some of the humanist work, and it says, what is it that we emotionally need, right? Like that's the thing that we need, and as like we will figure out any way to embrace that, to get that need met. And it can be either elegant, something that helps others, helps the world, helps our, is good for us, is good for our future, or it can be something that is horrible for the world and is horrible for other people and is horrible for us and is horrible for our future. But it's all in how we get our needs met. And uncertainty, which you're describing, or adventure seeking, like that is one of our 6 human needs.
Right.
And so like the fact that you're like, this is the one that turns me on, you didn't say that, but I'm saying that for you. Like the fact that you're like, this is what does it for me, like, all right. And I love that you're finding an elegant way to make that count.
Right. I appreciate you saying that, because you stated it better than I did. It's an elegant way to make sure that need is met. I also have my motorcycle, but that's a less elegant way to do it. But yes.
No, I've seen your bike. It's pretty nice, man. I don't know that I would shortchange the bike. It's a nice bike.
That's awesome.
And it's funny, we talk about that. That's actually a gift of sobriety, because I gave up riding to drink.
Yeah.
I gave up riding in my early 20s, knowing full well I'd wrap myself around a pole on 2 wheels.
Mm.
And when I came back into recovery, it was something that I thought was so far in my rearview mirror, I'd never be able to get it again. And one of the things my sponsor encouraged me to do is start looking at what I gave up to drink and seeing if there was still some love for some of those things that I gave up. And one of them was riding a motorcycle. And in fact, that's the one I gave up. And it was a love. It was an absolute joy and love. And now I've got that back in my life. It's interesting the things that recovery give you back.
So hugely important, right? Because I'm Joanne, and I've talked about this a lot. And, fear is usually the motivator that brings us into this world, into some form of recovery seeking, right? Whether it's court slips or, your significant other, or you're just scared shitless or whatever. But it only goes so far, because like you pointed out earlier, it's easy for us to keep backsliding, because eventually when you come in however you come in and your ass is like lit up, it cools off. You know what I mean? And then the whole the rationalization come pounding in. It's not that bad. Maybe I overreacted. It's completely normal to commit felonies on a regular basis. You know what I mean? Like, you can talk yourself in and out of anything. We're like the best salesmen on the planet. And, and then out the door we go. I think for me, what was so essential was figuring out what was going to keep me here. And it wasn't going to be fear. It wasn't going to be pain and suffering, because I already had all that. You know what I'm saying? I was full of all that. Fear, misery, mostly fear. Most of it, although it masked itself as just rage, most of it was fear. And thank God I had some really awesome women around me that said, you got to find something to get your groove back, because it's got to be the positive stuff that keeps you here. And I'm so grateful that they gave me that kind of instruction or suggestion, whatever you want to call it, because until I started thinking about that kind of thing and, wrapping my mind around the possibilities of those things again, I would have been right out the door.
Yep.
Right.
And before we came on, we were talking about that a little bit, even in the returning citizens realm, right? Mm-hmm. There's all kinds of statistics that can tell us as returning citizens if your life is going to be shit, right? There's all kinds of statistics that say, hey, these are going to be your outcomes. And one of the things I do not focus on, and I come from a legal background, I come from precision of language. One of the things I don't focus on at all are the statistics. Individually, we can have an individually great life. We can. There are millions of examples of people having great lives, living in recovery, living as returning citizens, and really becoming a part of their community. Like all of us becoming a part of our communities. And that's the part that I focus on so much. I try to focus on that to the exclusion of other things. Like, there's all kinds of stories that can tell us things are going to be shitty. But what about telling each other, hey, man, things are going to be okay? Or things are okay exactly the way they are, even if they're a little shitty. They're okay.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God. And that's a message like not only does a returning citizen need, that's a message that like all of us need. I mean, we started off saying like the reason that you parked on the side of the car is, on the side of the road, like, safe spot, of course, is that, like the capital of our country is locked down one more time, and like that's a scary time. And also the fact that there are people that have taken care of, making sure that our capital is safe, and that will translate, right? Like people making sure that they are, wearing a face mask when they go out in public and getting their vaccine when it's time. Like that means that one day before we know it, like we're going to be able to come out of COVID lockdown. And, like while we're in there, and I heard you say this too about like being in prison, it's like, but you didn't use this language, like while we're in there, we can be actively waiting, and by actively waiting, I mean like taking care of like cleaning up the garden of our mind and pulling out the stuff that doesn't work and putting it in the stuff that does work, choosing what to focus on that's going to feed our spirit and help us to grow our life, and then making decisions about like the conduct that we're going to continue, or the conduct we're going to let go of, and what is the best possible way to like really be myself. And if you're edgy, be edgy. And if you're not edgy, like that's cool too. We need a lot of people that aren't edgy to weigh out the people that are edgy, so like everybody serves a purpose. Be who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's oh man, that's amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, Byron, I'm speaking for myself, but I'm sure I'm speaking for Amy too. Like, dude, I love you, man. And I'm so glad that we got this time to spend together. I got
Yeah.
2 questions for you though before we wrap it up.
Okay.
Okay. So the first one is like at the end of the day, like I don't know, 20 years from now, like what do you hope is the legacy that you leave, that your life leaves? You know, that people are like, oh yeah, this is what Byron was about.
So the only thing, like if for a legacy, I got a son, right? I have a son, he's 21 years old. I feel so blessed because my son did not go through a lot of the things that I went through. My son is a really good kid. What the only legacy that I want to leave him is that as a guy, as a man, you'll make mistakes. Sometimes I worry that he pursues perfection a little bit too much because he is kind of perfect. As a man, you'll make mistakes, and that is not the measure of who you are. Your mistakes are not the measure of who you are. It's how you get back up for them. It's do you admit it and move on? Do you punish other people for pointing out your mistakes? Like, how do you handle your mistakes? And I would hope 20 years from now or 10 years from now or however long that God keeps me on this earth, that the legacy that I leave behind is, hey, man, he admitted his mistakes and he really did something about it. He did something about it. He took his mistakes and he did something about it. And I don't know whether I'm going to help another person, but what I do know is that even if I don't help another alcoholic ever in my life, even if I don't help another returning citizen, I will help somebody who knows an alcoholic. I will help somebody who has a perspective of what an ex-felon is, because I'm not going to rob them. They're going to come in contact with me, and I'm not going to commit a crime. They're going to have an opportunity to get to know somebody who's an ex-felon who hasn't harmed them. And they may never know that I'm an ex-felon. They may never know because I'm not going to behave that way.
Yeah.
And one day they'll pop up and they'll be like, wow, that Byron Fogan guy, he was in prison? Holy crap. He didn't rob me. He's a pretty big guy. He didn't do anything to me. You know what I mean? And so if I leave a legacy, it's like, hey, admit to your mistakes. Don't harm other people for pointing them out. And what do you do about them? What do you do about them? No matter how big they are.
Right on. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
That's some good stuff right there. So then my other question is, and I don't know if I don't know if it's applied to you or not, but if it does, like I definitely like I want to support you in your work. We want to support you in your work. Is there a way that we can support you in your work?
So the first thing you can do is follow me on Facebook at Sober Shit, which is SOBER _ SHYT.
Okay.
As I'm moving to Maryland, I've started an LLC, and there's going to be some things that are coming online that I'm really excited about. I started an initiative in Western New York called the Firm Initiative, which is formerly incarcerated and recovering men. There are some legal things that I need to do in order to move that to Maryland, and I'm moving that to Maryland. And all that information will be on that Facebook page, Sober Shit. And you'll be able to find some writings and, some musings about recovery, my own personal musings about recovery. I've been active on it more in the past, but it's something that I'm becoming more active with again. And that's the best way to figure out what I'm up to.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you for that, man, for sure.
You got it.
Sober shit.
You got it. Sober shit.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to, my friends.
It totally
at the end
is.
of the day, it was like, what I had to do was learn how to live, and I had to learn how to do things. And one of the most interesting things is I discovered that I could do a shit ton of stuff sober that I could not do drunk. And so if you would have told me that in my last days of drinking, hey man, your life is going to be more fun, I would have laughed at you. I would have laughed you out of my house.
Yeah.
And it turns out that I actually have a life worth living today, and I do lots of cool stuff that I never got to do before.
Nice.
Yeah, for sure. Love. Yeah. And agreed.
Yeah, me too.
I love you guys. You guys
I
are
know,
awesome.
man. It's so good to see your face.
Oh, thank you so much for like hanging with us today.
You got it. You got it. It was enjoyable, and I got to get off the road because it's a little bit of chaos out there.
I bet it is. Please drive home safe.
Everybody, I will, and everybody in DC, I'm praying for you guys. I don't really know what happened today. I just know it was bad, and I know that we're gonna get through this too. Just like you said, Joanna, we're gonna get through this. We're gonna get through this.
Yeah, we will. We got a lot of good people doing some good stuff.
Indeed.
Thank you again. And thank you everybody who was listening. We really, really appreciate you coming and hanging out and listening to us. And if you're into what Byron's got, go over to his Facebook page, sober_shit, SHYT.
Yeah, check out our man Byron, for real.
I'm sorry, I'm like a 10-year-old.
Well, are we all a little bit?
Yeah, probably pretty much.
I'm
All
41
right.
years old and still laugh at the word balls every time. I don't know why.
What's funny is I think Byron and I are about your age too.
I'm
like experiencing this youthful thing going.
Yeah.
I'm 48 going on 12.
Yeah, 100%.
There you go. 43 going on 10.
Yeah.
Well, and thank you guys. Have a great night, and we will catch you on the next episode.
Bye guys. Take it easy.